In our pilot system, we have 120 practices working with us, 30 at a time. Each cohort works for 6 months, actively piloting, and then for the other 6 months we go back and we say, did these indicators work or not? If they didn't work, why not? And I'll give you one example of an indicator that you would think would be perfectly okay. We have a palliative care domain, and one of the indicators last year was to ask patients on the palliative care indicator their preferred place of death. That's part of our gold standards framework for palliative care. Everybody thought evidence-based indicator, it'll fly through piloting. I'm out there talking to GPs and 30 practices, and I'm asking them about that indicator. And I have to say, when I walked into the first practice, I thought, well, this would be an easy one. They'll all say, great, thank you very much. What I heard from 10 of the 30 practices was general practitioners who tick-boxed that indicator. So there was one particular person I was speaking to, and I said, what do you think of that indicator? And she said, oh, I asked this one woman, and she didn't know where she wanted to die. It was terrible. And I said, oh gosh. And I said, what did you do? Well, I asked her the following month. Do you know she still didn't know where she wanted to die? And I went, oh, okay. So what did you do? Third month, she still didn't know. So I told her she had to choose. Seriously. Now that was the worst example, but there were others like that. So when I got to the advisory committee, I said, well, and I told almost word for word what I just told you. And the advisory committee voted for it not to go through. Because it's appalling tick-box medicine. There are something like 55,000 people today on our palliative care registers in the United Kingdom. And if only 10% of doctors, work in that way, you've got 5,000 people being asked in that dreadful way. So, piloting works. So pilot. This just gives you a feel. We'll have 26 indicators given to us by the advisory committee. We put it through a consensus process, we pilot. And of those 26, we get about 5 good quality indicators through. I'm not going to talk more about that, I've got a whole presentation, but basically that's the sort of way that we can sift them down. Process or outcomes, like I said, 70% of our QoF is on process at the moment. So government, you don't have to read that, it's very boring, it's DH speak. Except, I think the important sentence there is that we are going to recalibrate the NHS. So it focuses on what really matters to patients, health outcomes. The government is very, very serious in the United Kingdom at the moment. It has taken no prisoners over this one. It wants an outcomes-focused health service, and it wants an outcome-focused QoF. It's telling us it wants 15% of QoF actually focused on primary prevention, evidence-based public health and primary prevention indicators in 2 years' time. I'm just putting those up. This is now sort of part of our statutes. We've got to change QoF to be more outcomes-focused. Only, of course, it's difficult to have things that are outcomes-focused because of issues of attribution. But anyway, the other reasons why I think we probably do have too much emphasis on process at the moment is that there is definitely some evidence that shows, particularly from Tim Doran's work in the UK, that only something like 1.3% and the tops 3.6% of our overall improvement in outcomes can be directly linked to what we do in the process. So what I read that to say is that we can focus all of our efforts onto process, but that does not translate into a major way into patient-level outcomes. The other thing, Martin's slide yesterday, the difference about hospital admissions dropping, is really interesting, but he can't explain it, I can't explain it, and there is also data from other researchers that is not showing drops in hospital admissions. So we don't really know yet whether or not QoF has made a big difference to admissions. So I think what we do have to do now is to change our gaze a little bit from the big focus we've got on processes, and we do have to look at outcomes in a more serious way than we currently have done. So what we're now moving towards, this is literally what we are doing today, if you like, is moving towards something called tightly linked measures, which are quite popular in the States. What tightly linked measures do is that you incentivise a process, but it's a process that, as the section says, is really directly linked to an outcome. These measures are very good because they've also been shown again in the context of the United States to stop patients being removed from lists if the GP doesn't feel that they are going to help them achieve a target. all will become clear with the next slide, I hope. So this is a tightly linked measure in hypertension. So say you've got somebody with very high blood pressure and you just can't get their blood pressure down. There might be a temptation to remove them from your target. So you do that very simply by free texting rather than recoding that they had hypertension in the United Kingdom. Or you would use a blood pressure read code that's not picked up automatically. However, there will be no temptation to do that if we move to tightly linked measures, because what we're incentivising is increasing their medicines, increasing the dose, or changing their medicines, rather than only incentivising the end blood pressure target. These indicators are phenomenally difficult to get right in terms of the underpinning business rules. So we're going to pilot these very carefully for at least 18 months before we introduce them into live QoF. But this is the direction of travel now in the United Kingdom. We can no longer simply pay general practitioners for taking blood pressure and then giving them hard-edged targets. You know, cholesterol's of 5, blood pressures of whatever the evidence base is. In order to be more sophisticated, in order to move towards outcomes, in order not to encourage patients who are difficult to manage to be chucked off lists, frankly, we're going to move towards tightly linked measures. So in 2 years, you will see a very different QoF, I think, than you've currently got in the United Kingdom. And then watch what happens. And these are the slides that you saw yesterday. So again, I'm not going to dwell very much. I really genuinely don't know exactly what these mean, other than it means don't take an indicator out and leave it. Don't assume. This is the diabetic retinopathy. In fact, there's an 8% drop over 4 years in retinopathy screening. It's not such dramatic.
Can you tell us what the indicator here is? It screening every year, or what is it?
It was screening every 3 years. And with an age range that we don't have in the UK, because these are Kaiser indicators. But it was also retinopathy in what would effectively be a secondary care service. So, which is why they're not a direct match to the UK, but they were the closest we could find. Yeah, and this line with screening again, you saw yesterday. A smaller, see it's 80 to 60, so that's a very small drop. It's something like 1.2% per year. But, you know, cumulatively, that all adds up. And I love this slide because, you know, it goes from red to then you turn the money back on, bam, it's gone up again. There's something going on, but I'm not going to say, I will not say, it's just the money. But there's something going on. The South and then South, yeah.
What about inappropriate pap smears and screening? Too many maybe being included in there. Perhaps the guidelines being better applied later on.
I can't honestly answer that because it's US data, and we didn't look at that. So again, I would give you an inaccurate answer. I'm not going to.
Taking away the incentive, does that mean taking away the money? Or is it also taking away the IT system pop-ups?
No, it was just the money. I was quite careful about that. The only thing that changed was the money. All the other things were still there, the education and the pop-ups, yeah.
If you just look at it, the last 4 dots, last 5 dots actually, it's more or less on line.
Yeah.
Is this actually a sure measure?
It was, the statisticians in Kaiser spent a long time making sure this data was accurate. It's also on hundreds of thousands of people, very large data set. It's as good a, you can imagine I had some quite interesting conversations, telephone calls to Kaiser because they were not altogether happy about this data being made public. And they, the people in Kaiser, were absolutely certain this data was 100% accurate. So yes, I'm certain that this is accurate. But you're right to sort of say, well, hang on a sec, you know, it's not a lot, is it? But there is something there. I've got another 2 slides with similar patterns on these 4 indicators that we looked at. And we didn't look at 6 and only choose the 4 that, you know, have this pattern. On all 4, this is a similar pattern.
Alex in Portugal. What are the professionals' perspectives on whether they were confronted with this result or not?
No, they weren't. And in fact, Kaiser had never done this before. They never looked at this, which is why they were interested initially to do it. They had the data, but they never analysed it, so they never fed it back to their own professionals. And because it was quantitative rather than qualitative, I don't know what our professionals thought. This is going to be quick because otherwise it's going to turn into death by PowerPoint. I've only got about 3 more slides, so that
stopping at 2007. Do we know anything about the indicators?
No. But that's a good question. Okay, so watch. My cough of my dreams would be watch. And don't overpay. Oh, I think we put far too much money against this in the United Kingdom. And I think it has changed motivations, and I think it has changed values, actually. However, there's a sort of funny side to it. We have a terrible newspaper called the Daily Mail, very right-wing. Heaven knows what the reading age is, about 3.5, I think. And I was sat in a hotel, actually in Amsterdam, about to go and talk about QoF about 4 or 5 months ago, and there it was. This was front page of the Daily Mail. Overpaid NHS doctors and too few practitioners knock 3 years off Britain's lives. And I just put a little bit of the text in it. What it was essentially saying is that lazy general practitioners are scooping up all the money from the system. Listen, patients, if GPs got paid less, you wouldn't die of cancer and you'd all live 3 years longer. I mean, it was utter rubbish, but the fact is it was front page of the Daily Mail, got reported on the news, and it became a doctor bashing headline. And I think if we didn't have 20% of our income related to a pay-for-performance system that many of the general public don't really understand, then I don't think negative headlines like this would appear. So don't overpay. So, my summary slide. If this was part of my dreams, I'd have had baseline data in 2003, I'd have started piloting in 2004, we'd have started to think about tight link measures not in April 2011, but in April 2004. We would monitor any of the indicators. So the 5 process measures that came out last Friday, at the moment we're not monitoring what's going to happen with the data. I'm going to keep an eye on a system called GPRD as a research project, but the UK is not investing money to watch what's going to happen and attach less money to it. So that is what I would do if I were Queen. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Peter.
Have you done any surveys of doctors and asked them if you weren't paid for doing all this, once a year, whatever, would you be happy with this because it's giving you a picture of your practice? Would that be enough?
No, but maybe that's my next research project. It's a good question. Actually, I've just finished doing a qualitative work with patients about it, which there isn't time to talk about now, but I can talk about it a bunch. But no one's actually asked doctors what would you do if, but that's a very good question.
You say that before piloting the indicators, it's open to all the population and you receive comments. Do you receive comments only from healthcare professionals, or do you receive also comments from patients or citizens? Let's say?
We have them from professional patient bodies. So, for example, Diabetes UK commented on diabetes indicators. But so far, we haven't had them from individual patients. And part of the reason why I did this piece of work 2 or 3 months ago, going and talking to patients, was to see if they even knew what QoF was. And interestingly, I asked them the 2 main questions were, have they heard about the new NHS reforms? And they all had. And then I said, have you ever heard of QoF? And these are all patients with long-term conditions. So they would have their checks, their medication reviews, all the things I showed you about stroke, for example. None of these 60 people were interested enough to allow me into their homes to talk to me for an hour about health service reform. None of them had heard of QoF. So I think there is another message, which is actually engage your patient population, because they're on the pointy end and they'll have some really good ideas for you.
Hi, from Germany. I would guess that there was some feedback that the law was earlier to doctors and GPs. Would additional assessment and benchmark of the
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of benchmarking.
Yes. We have an information centre site. Martin showed you his practice yesterday. You probably couldn't see that very clearly on that slide. But for your individual practice, you are benchmarked against your local health population and the whole of England. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Peter.